I gave them everything. My house, my money, 7 years of my life. And in return, they locked me in the attic and tried to steal the $1 million lottery ticket I'd bought. Don't go anywhere. This story will make you disbelieve what people can do to their own mother. Like and comment the city you're viewing from so I know how far my story has come. And now, let me tell you it all, from the beginning. I should have known something was wrong the morning I found my husband's reading glasses folded on the kitchen counter, the lenses still smudged from the last time he'd worn them. 3 weeks after we buried Frank, and I still couldn't bring myself to move them. I'd walk past that counter 6, 7 times a day, and every time I'd stop and just stand there. Like if I looked long enough, he might come shuffling in from the garage, grumbling about the neighbor's leaf blower, asking what was for dinner. But Frank wasn't coming back. And the house that we had paid off together over 31 years, felt so enormous and so quiet that some mornings I couldn't tell the difference between being lonely and being suffocated. That's the context you need to understand what happened next. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't a story about a foolish woman who didn't see it coming. I saw pieces of it. I just chose to believe that love was stronger than greed. I was 64 years old, and I still believe that. My son Ryan called me on a Thursday evening in late October, about 6 months after Frank's funeral. I remember it was Thursday because I'd just finished watching the old crime drama I always watched on Thursday nights, Frank's favorite, and I'd cried through the last 20 minutes the way I'd been crying through everything that fall. The phone rang, and it was Ryan's voice, and something about it sounded off. Not sad, just careful. "Mom," he said, "Vanessa and I have been talking." Those 7 words. I should have asked him to stop right there. Ryan was 41 that year, our only child. He worked in commercial real estate, which sounds more stable than it was. The market had been rough on him for a couple of years, deals falling through, commissions drying up, one bad investment in a strip mall outside Charlotte that had quietly bled him for 18 months. He'd never told me the full extent of it. Ryan was like his father in that way. Too proud to ask for help directly, too stubborn to admit when something wasn't working. Vanessa was 38, sharp-featured, well-dressed, the kind of woman who made every room feel slightly more formal just by walking into it. She'd grown up in a household that measured everything, affection, effort, status, and she had brought that measuring into her marriage with my son. I had never completely warmed to her. But she was my son's wife. She was the mother of my grandchildren, Lily and Marcus, who were 9 and 6 that year. So I kept my reservations to myself the way good mothers do, and I smiled at the right moments, and I told myself it wasn't my place to have opinions about who Ryan loved. "Talking about what?" I asked. "We're in a tight spot, Mom, a real tight spot. The Charlotte deal went sideways worse than I let on, and we're behind on the mortgage, like 4 months behind." The silence on my end wasn't judgment. It was the particular silence of a mother calculating how fast she can get to her child. "How much do you need?" I said. "That's the thing." Another pause. I could hear Vanessa's voice in the background, low and steady, coaching him. "We were thinking, and this is just an idea, Mom, just something to talk about. We were thinking it might make more sense for us to move in with you, temporarily, just until I get back on my feet. The house is so big, and you're there alone, and it would save us. It would help us not lose everything." I looked around the living room. Frank's chair, the lamp he'd picked out at a yard sale and been inexplicably proud of, the bookshelves he'd built himself, slightly crooked, that I'd never let him fix because I thought the imperfection was charming. "When would you want to come?" I said. Ryan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a week. "We were thinking soon, like the end of the month." "Bring the kids," I said. "I'll make up the big bedroom." That was October. The temporary arrangement lasted 7 years. The first few months were actually fine. I want to be honest about that because the truth matters here. There were genuinely good moments in those early months. Lily helping me bake on Saturday mornings, Marcus falling asleep against my shoulder during movie nights, Ryan and I sitting on the back porch after dinner the way we used to when he was a teenager, and Frank would come out and join us, and we'd talk about nothing in particular for an hour. That happened. It was real. Vanessa kept her distance more than she participated, but I told myself she was adjusting. New house, new routine, her pride hurt by the circumstances. I understood pride. I gave her space. What I didn't fully register at the time was how quickly the house stopped feeling like mine. It happened gradually. That's the thing about gradual change. You don't notice it the way you'd notice a sudden break. You just look up one day and think, when did that happen? When did things shift? The first shift was small. About 2 months after they moved in, Vanessa rearranged the kitchen. I came downstairs one morning and couldn't find my colander. I asked her where she'd put it, and she looked at me with this polite, slightly exhausted expression and said, "Eleanor, the old arrangement wasn't really functional. I reorganized everything. It's in the lower cabinet now." Not, "I'm sorry, does this work for you?" Not, "Do you mind if I change a few things?" Just, "It's done. It's better. Here's where things are now." I found my colander in a cabinet I had to kneel to reach. I said nothing. I told myself it was just a colander. The second shift was the living room furniture. About 4 months in, Vanessa declared the couch was too small for the family, and they needed something more practical. I came home one afternoon from grocery shopping to find my sofa gone and a large, aggressively beige sectional in its place. Frank's chair, Frank's particular beloved, slightly worn armchair that I had kept specifically because I wasn't ready to let it go, was not in the room. "Where is Frank's chair?" I asked Ryan. He was in the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water, not making eye contact. Vanessa had some stuff donated. She was doing a whole house refresh, you know. It was a lot to coordinate. "Ryan, where is your father's chair?" He finally looked at me. Something moved across his face. Guilt, I think. Real guilt. And then it closed off. "It's gone, Mom. I'm sorry. I should have asked you first." I walked upstairs to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my hands together in my lap and breathed. It was just a chair. That is what I told myself. It was just a chair. By the end of the first year, Ryan had found steadier work, a new firm, better clients, the worst of the financial crisis in his rearview mirror. I waited for them to start talking about finding their own place again. They didn't. Not once. The temporary arrangement had calcified into something else entirely, and nobody acknowledged the transition because acknowledging it would have required a conversation that nobody wanted to have. What I noticed instead was that the bills continued to flow through my accounts. The mortgage on my house, paid by me. Property taxes, me. Utilities, me. Groceries most weeks, also me. Ryan contributed occasionally, in erratic performative bursts, handing me an envelope of cash with a sheepish expression and then not mentioning money again for 3 months. Vanessa never once offered. I don't think it occurred to her. I also noticed that my role in the house had been quietly reclassified. I was no longer the owner who had graciously opened her home. I was the help. I watched the grandchildren before and after school so Vanessa could keep her schedule. I cooked dinner most nights because it became clear early on that Vanessa had no interest in cooking and Ryan worked late. I did the laundry, mine and the children's, and increasingly theirs as well, because the basket would just pile up outside the machine until I dealt with it. I cleaned, I maintained, I fixed things when they broke, because Ryan was too busy and Vanessa considered it beneath her to call a repairman. I'm not complaining about the work. I want to be precise about that. I loved being useful. I loved having the children in the house, hearing their noise and their chaos, watching them grow. That part kept me going. What I'm describing is the slow removal of dignity that accompanied the labor, the way the work was expected without being acknowledged, the way my presence in my own home became conditional on my usefulness. One evening, I think we were about 18 months in, I sat down at the dinner table after serving everyone and Lily, sweet 9-year-old Lily, looked up at me and said, "Grandma, you forgot the bread." The way she said it, not unkindly, just matter of fact, like fetching the bread was what I was there for. I got up and got the bread. Vanessa was looking at her phone and didn't notice. Ryan was cutting Marcus's chicken. Nobody saw anything. I sat back down and picked up my fork and somewhere inside me, very quietly, something bent. The bedroom situation evolved in the second year, and it broke something else in me that I don't think ever fully healed. Vanessa wanted a home office. Her consulting work had expanded. She was doing project management for a couple of corporate clients, which she discussed frequently and with great seriousness. And she needed dedicated space. The logical choice, she explained to Ryan, was the guest room. Except the guest room was being used by Ryan's home office already, which he needed for his real estate work. The next logical choice, apparently, was my bedroom. Not my bedroom specifically. That came a few months later, and it came the way most things came in that house. Not as a request, but as a presentation of an already made decision. Vanessa sat me down in the living room one Sunday morning with a cup of coffee she'd made me, which I should have recognized as a warning sign because she rarely made me coffee, and she laid it out. "Eleanor, we've been thinking about space. The kids are growing, Ryan needs his office, I need mine. Your room is the largest on the second floor, and honestly, with 2 people sharing it instead of 1, she meant herself and Ryan. It just makes more sense. We thought you might actually be more comfortable in the attic space. It's been renovated, it's private, you'd have your own bathroom. The attic, in my own house." "Vanessa," I said. I tried to keep my voice level. "This is my home. I own this house." She gave me a smile that was patient in a way that felt patronizing. "Of course it is, Eleanor. We're not saying otherwise. We're just talking about practical arrangements. It's really nice up there, and you've always said you like quiet." I looked at Ryan. He was studying the floor. "Ryan," I said, "say something." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Mom, we could fix it up however you want. Put in whatever you need. It's actually got more light than—" "Ryan," he met my eyes. The guilt was back, bigger now. "It makes sense logistically, Mom. Just try it. If it's terrible, we'll figure something else out." I moved into the attic that March. I told myself I would give it 6 months and then have a real conversation. That conversation never happened. I lived in that attic for 5.5 years. I need to stop and tell you something about Ryan because I don't want you to think he was a monster. He wasn't. That's almost the hardest part. He was a weak man who loved his mother and loved his wife and could not reconcile those 2 things when they pulled in opposite directions. Every time Vanessa pushed, and she pushed constantly, methodically, with great patience and great skill, Ryan bent. Not because he didn't care, because he was conflict avoidant in the deepest, most damaging way, the kind that looks like easygoing from the outside but is actually a complete failure of spine. He would apologize to me privately. That happened more times than I can count. He'd knock on my attic door in the evenings when the kids were in bed, and he'd sit on the edge of my chair and look tired and say, "I know things aren't perfect, Mom. I know. I'm going to fix it." And I believed him. Every time I believed him because he was my son and I recognized the shame in his face. But he never fixed anything. The apologies were a release valve. He'd let the pressure out and then go back downstairs and let Vanessa reset the terms. I understood it. I hated that I understood it. I had spent 31 years with a man who was present and accountable and direct, and watching my son be none of those things to the woman he'd married was a particular kind of grief I hadn't expected. Let me tell you about the incident with the neighbor's fence, because I want you to understand what my daily life looked like by year 4. My neighbor to the left, a retired school principal named Harold Okafor, had a fence that ran along our property line. Harold and I had been friendly for 15 years. We'd wave across the yard, trade surplus tomatoes in summer, share the occasional cup of tea on the porch. After Frank died, Harold had been one of the people who showed up with food without being asked. He was a decent man. One afternoon that summer, I was out in the garden, the one small piece of the property I had maintained consistent control over because Vanessa had no interest in dirt, when Harold came out to say hello. We talked for maybe 20 minutes over the fence about nothing consequential. His granddaughter, the tomatoes, whether the summer had been hotter than usual. That evening at dinner, Vanessa was cold, not visibly hostile. She was too controlled for that, but cold in the specific way she got when she wanted me to feel that I'd done something wrong. After dinner, as I was clearing the plates, she said, without looking up from her laptop, "Eleanor, I'd prefer if you didn't spend extended time talking to Harold. It's a liability thing. If you tell him something about the property and there's ever a dispute, I set down the plates. Harold is my neighbor. He has been my neighbor for 15 years. I understand that. I'm just saying you don't always think about the implications. Vanessa. I kept my voice even. I am 67 years old. I think I can manage a conversation about tomatoes. She looked up at me then. There was something flat in her expression. Not cruel exactly, just dismissive. The way you might look at someone who has just made your point for you. I'm not questioning your intelligence, Eleanor. I'm just asking you to be mindful. Ryan was looking at his phone. Ryan, I said. He put the phone down, looked between me and Vanessa. Maybe we can just... It's not a big deal, right? Both sides. It's just... I picked up the plates and walked to the kitchen. I washed every dish that night by hand, slowly, carefully, the way I used to when Frank and I would do them together. He'd wash, I'd dry, and we'd talk about our days. I washed every dish by hand, and I told myself the same thing I always told myself. Don't make it worse. Keep the peace. It'll pass. But nothing passed. That's the thing. Each small indignity that passed simply made room for the next one. By year 5, I was not permitted. And I use that word deliberately, because that's what it had become, a system of permission, to make decisions about the house without running them through Vanessa. If a repairman came, Vanessa handled it. If something needed replacing, Vanessa chose it. My name was on the deed, but she ran the household the way a manager runs a department she's taken over by attrition. She even started redirecting the grandchildren. That one hurt in ways I wasn't prepared for. Lily and Marcus had always been close to me. I had spent more daily hours with them than either of their parents during those years. But Vanessa began making it clear, through small redirections and strategic interruptions, that my influence over them needed to be managed. If I told Marcus a story at bedtime, Vanessa would appear in the doorway and say it was too late. If Lily asked me a question at dinner, about history or science or something she'd learned at school, and I started to answer, Vanessa would cut in. Not with hostility, with authority. With the casual authority of someone who had decided, somewhere along the way, that grandmother was a role with a limited scope. Lily doesn't need to hear about that kind of thing, Vanessa said once, after Lily had asked me about a news story she'd seen, and I'd been in the middle of explaining it. She has school for that. Lily looked at me, 11 years old, and she looked at me with something careful in her eyes, like she was watching to see how I'd react, cataloging it. I smiled at Lily and let Vanessa's voice fill the silence. But that night I sat in my attic room and I did not feel like letting it pass. I felt something else, something tight and hot that I hadn't felt in years, something that tasted like anger. I didn't act on it, not yet, but it was there. The bicycle happened in April of the 6th year, and that was the moment, looking back now, when whatever had been quietly building inside me stopped being abstract. Lily was turning 12. For weeks she had been talking about a particular bicycle, one of those lightweight ones with the thin tires that the older kids in the neighborhood rode. She described it to me in careful detail, the specific shade of blue, the kind of handlebars, the brand. She mentioned it the way children mention things they want but don't quite believe they'll get. I went to the bike shop myself. I paid for it with my own money. I had it assembled, and I put a bow on it, and I kept it in my car until the morning of Lily's birthday. When Lily came downstairs and saw it in the living room, her face did something I will never forget for the rest of my life. That pure, uncomplicated joy. It lit her up from the inside. She ran to me and threw her arms around my neck and said, "Grandma, it's exactly right. It's exactly the one." And I laughed, and for maybe 30 seconds, everything was exactly right. Vanessa came downstairs 10 minutes later. She looked at the bike, she looked at me. Then she looked at Lily with an expression that had nothing warm in it. "That's very nice," she said. "Lily, can I speak with you for a moment?" They went into the kitchen. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard enough. Responsibility. Too much too soon. Teaching the wrong values, what we're trying to build as a family. Lily came back out and she wasn't lit up anymore. She looked at me with those careful eyes she'd been developing. "Mom says we have to return it," she said. "She says it's too expensive for a gift." The bicycle I'd bought cost $240. "It's from me," I said carefully. "It's a birthday gift from your grandmother." "I know." Lily's voice was very small. "I know, Grandma. I'm sorry." Vanessa appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Eleanor, I appreciate the thought, but we're trying to teach the kids that gifts need to be proportional to... It's a parenting decision. I'd appreciate it if you'd respect that." I looked at my son. Ryan was sitting on the couch, holding his coffee with both hands, staring at the floor. There was a television commercial playing that nobody was watching. "Ryan," I said. One word. That was all. He looked up. He looked at me and at Vanessa and at Lily standing there with her arms at her sides. And he said, "Mom, Vanessa's right. We should have talked about big gifts first." I picked up my purse. I picked up my car keys. I walked out of my own house. I drove to the parking lot of the hardware store 3 blocks away, and I sat there for a very long time. And I thought about Frank, about what he would say if he could see what had happened to his house, to his son, to the woman he'd married. I thought about the 31 years I'd spent building something, and the 6 years it had taken to be slowly pushed out of the edges of it. I thought about what I owed my family and what I owed myself. Whether those two things were still the same. They weren't. I knew it for certain, sitting in that parking lot. They had not been the same for a very long time. I drove home eventually. I returned the bicycle because the alternative was a fight that would have cost Lily more than the bike was worth. I put the receipt in my purse, and I went upstairs to my attic room and I sat in the dark for a while. Then I got up, put on my coat. I walked 2 blocks to the corner store where I'd bought lottery tickets on and off for years. Always the same numbers. Frank's birthday, Ryan's birthday, my own, the day Lily was born, the day Marcus was born. Numbers that meant something. Numbers I'd been playing since Frank was alive. It was a Thursday evening. Cold, clear, the first real hint of spring still a few weeks away. The man behind the counter knew me by face. He printed the ticket and slid it across the counter, and I tucked it into my coat pocket and walked home in the dark. I didn't think about it again that night. I had other things to think about. The way Lily's face had looked before Vanessa took it apart. The way Ryan had sat on the couch and held his coffee and looked at the floor. The ticket stayed in my coat pocket. Just paper, just numbers, just the same small defiant ritual I'd been practicing for years. I had no idea. The ticket sat in my coat pocket for 3 days before I remembered it. That's the honest truth. I wasn't checking numbers obsessively, wasn't dreaming about windfalls. I was doing what I always did. Making breakfast, watching the kids, staying out of Vanessa's way, trying to occupy the smallest possible footprint in a house that had my name on the deed. The ticket was just a ticket. I'd bought hundreds of them over the years and won nothing bigger than $12. It was Marcus who reminded me, actually. He was 8 by then, gap-toothed and serious in the way young boys sometimes are, and he'd found the slip of paper sticking out of my coat pocket while I was helping him look for his library card. He held it up. "Grandma, did you win anything?" "I haven't checked, baby." "You should check." He handed it to me with the gravity of someone delivering important documents. "Dad says you always forget to check." I folded it and put it on my nightstand, telling myself I'd look later. Later turned out to be that evening, after dinner, after the dishes, after Marcus's bath and Lily's homework, and the particular exhaustion that comes not from physical work, but from spending an entire day carefully managing your own emotions so that nothing spills over onto people who won't handle it well. I sat on the edge of my attic bed and pulled up the lottery website on my phone, and I typed in the numbers, and I waited for the little graphic that usually told me I hadn't matched enough to matter. The screen didn't show me that graphic. I stared at what it did show me for so long that my eyes started to blur. Then I closed the browser and opened it again. Then I typed the numbers in a second time, slowly, digit by digit, checking each one against the ticket in my hand. The same result. I set the phone face down on the bed. I pressed both hands flat against my thighs. I breathed. Outside my attic window, I could hear the television downstairs. Some reality show Vanessa liked, something with arguing and dramatic music. I could hear Ryan's voice saying something and Vanessa's voice cutting over it, the way her voice always cut over his, clean and decisive, like shears through ribbon. I picked the phone back up, looked at the number again. Then I put the ticket in the inside pocket of my winter coat, the one with the deep zipper, and I hung that coat in the back of my closet behind 2 other coats. And I lay down on my bed in the dark and stared at the ceiling and tried to process the fact that my life had just changed in a way I could not yet fully understand. I told no one. Not that night. Not the next morning. That was the smartest decision I ever made, and I made it entirely on instinct. Well, I need to explain something about the woman I had become by that point, because it matters for what comes next. 6 years of slow erosion does something particular to a person. It doesn't break you all at once. It wears you down in layers, so gradually that each layer feels like adjustment, like adaptation, like you're just being reasonable. By the time I found that winning ticket, I had been so thoroughly managed and minimized in that house that I had genuinely stopped trusting my own judgment about things. Not about everything. Not about the grandchildren, not about practical matters, but about my place in the family, about whether my feelings were proportionate, about whether I was the problem, about those things I had become deeply uncertain. Vanessa was skilled at that. She never screamed. She never made scenes. She operated with a kind of quiet, persistent pressure that made you feel, over time, that the reasonable interpretation of any situation was hers, and that your own read on things was probably emotional and probably inaccurate. There's a word for that. I didn't have the word for it then. I just had the feeling. This constant low-grade sense of being slightly wrong, slightly too much, slightly in the way. So when I found that ticket, some part of me, the part that Vanessa had spent 6 years whittling at, said, "Don't do anything yet. Think. Be careful. Because if you move wrong, you'll lose this too." That instinct was correct. I just didn't know yet how correct. The days after were the strangest of my life. I went through every routine: breakfast, school drop-off, grocery run, dinner, with this enormous secret sitting in my chest like a stone I'd swallowed. I researched quietly, on my phone, in my room, with the door closed and the volume low. How to claim a lottery prize. How long you had. Whether you could remain anonymous. In our state, you could not, but there were legal structures that could provide some buffer. I wrote down names of attorneys I found through bar association listings. I wrote them in a small notebook I kept in the same coat pocket as the ticket. I didn't rush. That was hard. There was a part of me that wanted to move fast, to do everything immediately, to secure what I'd found before something could go wrong. But I sat with the urgency and I pressed it down, because I had learned in 6 years of living in that house that the worst mistakes I'd ever made had been reactive ones. Every time I'd reacted quickly to something Vanessa said, every time I'd spoken before I'd finished thinking, I'd lost ground. The deliberate thing was the survivable thing. What I was planning, if I'm being honest, was escape. Not revenge. Not yet. Though I'd be lying if I said the idea had no appeal. What I was planning was a clean exit, executed quietly, structured in a way that couldn't be undone. I wanted to be out of that house before anyone knew what I had. I wanted legal counsel and a separate account and a plan that was already in motion before Vanessa's eyes had a chance to sharpen. I was 8 days out from finding the ticket when things went wrong. It was my own fault, in a small way. I had been more careful than I'd ever been about anything in my life, but I had underestimated one thing. Vanessa paid attention to everything. I had taken a phone call from one of the attorneys I'd been researching, a woman named Patricia Holt, who specialized in estate law and had been recommended by 2 separate sources I'd checked. I'd called from my car, parked outside the grocery store, windows up. The call had lasted 11 minutes. I thought I'd been thorough about privacy. What I hadn't accounted for was that Ryan had borrowed my car that morning and left his jacket on the back seat. When I came in from the grocery store, Vanessa was standing in the kitchen with a look I recognized. Not angry, not yet, calculating. "Ryan's picking up his jacket," she said. "He said you'd been out a while." "I had errands," I said. "You look tired, Eleanor." "I'm fine." She let it go. But that evening I caught her glancing at my coat, the coat hanging by the front door, not the one in my closet, just my regular coat, with a focused, searching look, like she was trying to read something she hadn't been given access to. I went to bed that night with a cold feeling in my stomach. The following Saturday, while I was in the garden, Vanessa went through my room. I don't know this for certain, I can't prove it, What I know is that when I came back inside, the attic room had the particular quality of a space that has been very carefully returned to the state it was found in. Things almost exactly where I'd left them. Almost, but not quite. My phone was on the nightstand instead of charging on the dresser. The small notebook was still in my coat pocket, but the coat was hanging slightly differently. My heart did something awful when I noticed. I went downstairs. Vanessa was at the kitchen island with her laptop, the picture of composed productivity. Ryan was somewhere with the kids. Vanessa, I said. She looked up. Hmm? I looked at her face and I made a decision in that moment. Don't show it. Don't let her know what you know. If she found anything, you can't undo that, but you can control what happens next. Never mind, I said. I was going to ask if you needed anything from the store. We're fine, she said, and looked back at her screen. I walked back upstairs and I sat in my room and I thought harder and faster than I had thought about anything in years. The ticket was still in the coat in the closet. I checked, hands shaking slightly, still zipped in the inner pocket. The notebook was intact. Nothing was gone. But she'd been looking for something, and she was smart enough to find most things eventually. I called Patricia Holt on Monday morning and moved my appointment up. We met in her office that Wednesday. I brought the ticket. I brought my identification. I brought the notebook. Patricia was a measured woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain and no apparent interest in drama. She looked at the ticket, looked at the lottery verification I'd printed, looked at me. You haven't told anyone, she said. No one. Good. That's very good. She set down the papers. Eleanor, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to explain because the next steps matter quite a bit. I listened. I took notes. I did everything she told me to do, and I did it fast because something in Vanessa's face on Saturday had told me I was running out of time. I was not fast enough. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because it's true, and because the exact sequence of what happened next is important. I had done most of what Patricia outlined. I had contacted the lottery commission. I had submitted the initial verification paperwork. I had begun the process, but I had not yet had the full legal consultation I needed, and I had not yet moved the ticket to a secured location outside the house, which Patricia had specifically recommended. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of cold and unremarkable Tuesday that has no reason to be the worst evening of a year, and I was upstairs in my room when I heard it. Vanessa's voice, lower than usual, the way it got when she was focused. Ryan's voice responding. The particular silence that followed certain kinds of conversation between them. Not a comfortable silence, but a loaded one. The kind where something has just been decided. Then footsteps on the attic stairs. Both of them. Ryan knocked, which he almost always did, his one reliable courtesy. Mom, can we come in? I was sitting in the chair by the window. I had the small notebook in my hand because I'd been reviewing it. I closed it and set it in my lap. Come in. They came in together, which was unusual. Ryan came in first, Vanessa a half step behind. She was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something that was trying to be gentle and not entirely succeeding. Mom, Ryan said. He sat on the edge of my bed. We need to talk about something. All right, I said. He glanced at Vanessa. She gave him the smallest nod. We know about the ticket, he said. The room did not change. The light was the same. The temperature was the same. Everything looked and felt exactly as it had 3 seconds before. And yet everything was different. The way a glass looks the same the instant after it's been cracked, before the pieces separate. Do you? I said. Not a question. Eleanor. Vanessa sat down on the small stool by my dresser, which put her at eye level with me. Deliberate, I realized. She thought about how to do this. We're not here to upset you. We're here because we're family, and because this affects all of us, and because we want to handle it the right way. The right way, I repeated. You've been living here for 7 years, she said. This house, the expenses. We've all been contributing to this household. Ryan and I have put years into this family. And if there's something, she paused, choosing her words with the precision she always chose her words. If there's a windfall of any kind, it should be approached as something that belongs to the family, not one person acting alone. I looked at my son. He had the same expression he'd had on the couch the morning of Lily's bicycle, the one where he was watching his shoes like they contained an answer. Ryan, I said, did you go through my belongings? He looked up. We were worried about you. You've been acting, you seemed stressed, and we wanted to make sure. Did you go through my belongings? A pause. Vanessa saw the lottery commission letterhead in the recycling. She put it together. I had thrown away a draft letter. One draft letter, torn in half, which I had thought was small enough to be unreadable. Vanessa had apparently taped it back together. The deliberateness of that, the patience it required, the particular kind of hungry focus that drives a person to tape together torn paper from someone else's garbage, settled into my chest and sat there. The ticket belongs to me, I said. My voice was very steady. I bought it. I buy those numbers every week. Frank and I chose those numbers together 20 years ago. They're our family's birthdays. Which is exactly why it's a family thing, Vanessa said, smooth as ice. You used the children's birthdays. You used Ryan's birthday. These are family numbers, Eleanor. You've said so yourself. Using someone's birthday as a lucky number doesn't give them a legal claim. We're not talking about legal, Vanessa said. And for the first time, something slipped in her expression. Just for a second. Something harder underneath the careful gentleness. We're talking about what's right. What's fair. After everything we've contributed to this household. The room was very quiet. I want you to leave my room, I said. Mom, Ryan, I want you to leave my room. Ryan stood. He looked at me and I could see him wanting to say something. One of his private apologies, his pressure valve releases. And I looked back at him with a stillness I didn't entirely feel. And whatever he was going to say didn't come out. He moved toward the door. Vanessa stood more slowly. She straightened her shirt. We can discuss this when you've had time to think, Eleanor. We're not your enemies. She said it like she believed it. That was the part I kept returning to later. She said it like she genuinely believed it. They went back downstairs. I sat in my chair for a long time. Then I got up, put on my winter coat, the one with the deep zipper, and walked out of the house without saying anything to anyone, got in my car, and drove. I drove for almost an hour. I ended up parked outside a diner I hadn't been to in years, and I went inside and ordered coffee and sat in a booth by the window and thought through every step of what I needed to do. Because here's what I understood sitting in that booth. Vanessa had just told me, in language she considered diplomatic, that she intended to claim a portion of my lottery winnings by framing them as communal property. She had been building toward this kind of claim for 6 years without knowing the prize was coming. She'd simply been laying groundwork for control, and now the thing she'd been trying to control had suddenly become worth a great deal of money. She was organized, she was determined, and she had my son. What she didn't have was the ticket. It was in my coat pocket right then, in that diner booth. And she didn't have Patricia Holt. And she didn't have the 7 years of records I had been keeping, not strategically, not at first, but over time I had accumulated a detailed, dated accounting of every dollar I had spent on that household, every bill, every grocery receipt, every repair. I had kept them because I am the daughter of a woman who kept records, and because Frank had always said that paper is how you tell the truth later when someone tries to rewrite it. I pulled out my phone and texted Patricia Holt. Something has changed. Can we meet tomorrow? Her response came 4 minutes later. Yes, 9 a.m. I finished my coffee, tipped well, drove back to the house, and went upstairs to my attic room and did not sleep much. But what sleep I got was oddly calm. I was not afraid. That surprised me. I had spent 6 years being managed and minimized and carefully afraid of rocking the boat, and now that the boat had been rocked in the most dramatic way imaginable, I was not afraid. I was something else, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I was ready. What happened over the next 2 weeks was not a confrontation. It was a campaign. That's the only honest word for what Vanessa launched. Methodical, multi-front, executed with the same focused energy she brought to everything she decided mattered. The first front was Ryan. She worked on him the way she always worked on him, gradually, persistently, reframing things until his understanding of the situation matched hers. Within days, Ryan had convinced himself, or been convinced, that the lottery money was genuinely a family matter, that I was being unreasonable, that my reaction was a symptom of the grief and isolation I'd apparently been suffering. He came to my room twice to have versions of the same conversation, patient, reasoning, the tone you'd use with someone who needed to be talked down from something. Mom, I just want you to think about what you're doing. You're not in this alone. You have us. I know I have you, Ryan, I said, both times. And both times I meant it as something different than he took it. The second front was more alarming. Vanessa began, quietly, over coffee with certain friends of hers who happened to know certain people, suggesting that I had not been quite myself lately. That the stress of living alone, of grief, of age, had begun to affect my judgment. She didn't say anything definitive, nothing that could be pinned down. She just planted it, seeded the idea the way you'd seed a garden, patient, trusting the conditions. I found out because Lily told me. She came up to my room one Thursday after school, the way she sometimes did when she wanted to talk without her parents nearby. She was 12 now, perceptive in the way girls that age can be when they've learned to read rooms early, and she sat on the edge of my bed with her backpack still on, and she said, Grandma, Mom was on the phone with Aunt Deborah, and she said you've been forgetting things and getting confused. I was quiet for a moment. When did she say that? Yesterday. I heard it from the hallway. She looked at me carefully. You're not confused. You're the least confused person I know. My throat did something complicated. I'm all right, baby. Don't worry about me. I'm not worried, she said. I'm mad. She left 20 minutes later to do her homework, and I sat with what she told me, and I felt the coldness of it spread through my chest, because I understood exactly what Vanessa was doing. She was constructing a preemptive narrative, one in which any legal action I took, any assertion I made about the ticket, could be contextualized as the confused behavior of an elderly woman who wasn't fully in command of her faculties. It was calculated, and it was cruel, and it was exactly the kind of thing that, 6 months earlier, would have paralyzed me. Instead, I called Patricia, and I told her what Lily had told me. And Patricia said, very calmly, "Good that you know. We document everything from this point forward. Every conversation, every incident, time and date. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. "I've been doing it for years." Patricia had told me to be patient. She had told me, in her measured way, that the legal process required specific sequencing, that rushing any piece of it could create vulnerabilities we didn't need. I understood this intellectually. Living it was something else. Because while I was being patient, Vanessa was not. The shift happened fast, faster than I had anticipated, which told me she'd been thinking about this longer than the 2 weeks since she'd confronted me in my attic room. Looking back now, I think the moment she taped together that torn draft letter was the moment the plan started forming. She'd had weeks to think while I was still believing I had time. The first sign was the spending. Ryan came home one evening with a look I recognized. The forced casualness of a man who has done something he knows is questionable and is hoping it won't be noticed. He'd bought a new car. Not extravagant by some standards, but a significant step up from what they'd been driving, leased, with payments that assumed an incoming sum of money that had not yet been legally established as theirs. I was in the kitchen when he pulled into the driveway. I watched through the window. Vanessa came out the front door and walked around the car with her arms crossed and a small, satisfied expression. Ryan said something that made her laugh. They looked for a moment like the couple they must have been in the beginning, easy with each other, aligned. They came in through the front door, and Ryan saw me standing in the kitchen, and the casualness flickered. "What do you think? Good deal, right?" "I think," I said carefully, "that you haven't received anything yet." "We will," he said. "Patricia can't hold this up forever." I looked at him. "Patricia is my attorney, Ryan. She works for me." He opened the refrigerator. "We should talk about getting a mediator, neutral party, someone who isn't, working an angle." "My attorney isn't working an angle. She's doing her job." "Mom." He turned back to me with the refrigerator still open, the cold air spilling out, and his face had that particular expression, the one that was trying to be patient with me. "This isn't a fight. That's what I keep trying to get you to understand. This doesn't have to be adversarial. You share this with us. Everybody's taken care of. Nobody has to go through any kind of legal thing. Close the refrigerator, I said. He closed it. Ryan, listen to me very carefully. That ticket was purchased by me, with my money, using numbers I have played for 20 years. There is nothing to mediate. There is no shared claim. I love you, and I want to find a way through this that doesn't destroy our family. But I will not be pressured out of what is mine. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Vanessa thinks we should talk to someone. A doctor. The cold that moved through me then was different from anything that had come before. It had teeth. A doctor, I repeated. She's worried about you. We both are. You've been isolating. You've been... The secrecy, Mom. The way you've been handling this. It's not like you. I set down the dish towel I'd been holding, folded it on the counter. Good night, Ryan. I went upstairs. I sat in my chair. I wrote down the date, the time, and exactly what he had said, word for word, while it was still fresh. Then I picked up the phone and called Patricia and left a message. They're moving toward a competency angle, I said. I need to know what that looks like legally and how we preempt it. Patricia called back the next morning. She was not alarmed, which helped me not be alarmed. She had seen this before, she said, in estate disputes, in inheritance cases, whenever there was significant money and a family member who believed proximity entitled them to a share. Here's what we do, she said. We get you evaluated first, proactively. You choose the doctor, you schedule the appointment, you get a clean cognitive assessment on record before they can initiate anything. Takes the weapon out of their hands. When? This week, if possible. I made the appointment that same day. The doctor was a geriatric specialist on the other side of the city, someone completely outside any social circle that connected to Vanessa. I went alone on a Thursday morning, and I sat in an exam room and answered questions and did the pattern tests and the memory sequences. And the doctor, a quiet, methodical man named Dr. Farrell, told me afterward that I was cognitively sharp across every measure they'd assessed. Any concerns on your end? He asked. My daughter-in-law is suggesting I may be losing my faculties, I said. He looked at me for a moment. Based on this evaluation, there is no clinical basis for that concern. Can I have that in writing? He handed me the printed summary before I left. I drove home with that paper in my bag, and something restored in me that I hadn't even realized had been eroding. There is something uniquely destabilizing about having people close to you question your sanity. Even when you know it's tactical, even when you understand exactly what they're doing, it gets under your skin. It makes you second-guess the things you were certain of. Dr. Farrell's quiet, clinical confirmation that I was exactly who I knew myself to be felt like solid ground after a long time of shifting. I got home at noon. The house was quiet. Vanessa at a client meeting, Ryan at work, kids in school. I made lunch and ate it at my own kitchen table and took my time. I was still sitting there when my phone rang, a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Hayes, this is Carol Jennings from the Millfield Courier. A pause. We're running a story on the recent lottery winner from this district, and we understood you might have information. I ended the call. My hands were very still on the table. I thought, how? Then I thought, Vanessa. She had called a newspaper, or Ryan had, under her direction. Either way, someone in my household had contacted local media, and the only reason to do that, the only conceivable reason, was to get the story into the public record before I could shape it, to establish a version of events, to make the claim of family ownership part of the public narrative before the legal question was resolved. I called Patricia. They contacted a local paper, I said. A pause on her end. Then, okay, that changes our timeline. Eleanor, we need to move the claim filing up, today if we can. The Lottery Commission has a public disclosure requirement once the claim is filed, but the claim itself establishes your identity as the purchaser on the official record. If they're trying to build a counter-narrative in the press, we need the legal record established first. Tell me what to do. Can you come to my office at 2? I'll be there at 1:30. We filed the formal claim that afternoon. Patricia walked me through every document, every attestation, every piece of supporting evidence, the ticket, the purchase receipt from the corner store which I had thought to keep, my long history of playing those exact numbers which Patricia pulled together through a combination of my own records, and, remarkably, a loyalty card from that same corner store that had logged years of my ticket purchases. Every Thursday, same numbers, same store, recorded automatically, paper trails I hadn't even known I was creating. This is very good, Patricia said, going through the loyalty card records. This kind of purchase history is powerful documentation. It establishes pattern and intent. Frank always said, keep your receipts, I said. Patricia allowed herself a small smile. Frank was right. By 4 o'clock, the claim was in. The Lottery Commission's processing would take several days, but the documentation was locked in, time-stamped, official, mine. Whatever story Vanessa was building for the Millfield Courier was now running directly into a legal wall. I drove home feeling something that wasn't quite triumph and wasn't quite relief. It was more like the feeling of having secured a door you'd been holding closed with your body for weeks. You're still standing in the same hallway. The danger hasn't passed, but at least now the lock is engaged. What I came home to was not what I expected. The house felt different the moment I walked in. Not physically, everything was where it had been, but the atmosphere had changed, the way air changes before a storm, that particular heaviness that isn't rain yet but is something. Vanessa was in the living room. She wasn't working. She was sitting on the beige sectional with her hands in her lap and her phone face down on the cushion beside her, and she looked at me when I came in with an expression I had never seen on her face in 7 years. She'd been crying. Not recently, but the evidence was there, the particular flatness around her eyes, the careful way she'd recomposed her face that hadn't entirely worked. I stopped in the doorway. Where are the kids? I said. Ryan took them to dinner. I asked him to. She was quiet for a moment. Sit down, Eleanor. Something in her voice was different. The authority was gone. That smooth, practiced authority that she wore like a second skin. What was underneath it was raw. I wasn't sure what to do with that. I sat in the chair across from her, not close. She looked at me for a long time before she spoke. The paper called Ryan, she said. They'd already talked to you? They called me, I said. I didn't speak to them. I know. They told Ryan you'd hung up. She pressed her lips together. That was me. I called them. I thought if it was public, if there was a record, you'd have to acknowledge that this was a family matter. It isn't a family matter, Vanessa.